So we're already a few weeks into 2014, and honestly it was all I could manage not to continue putting off checking out the manga that last year had to offer.
2013 was an interesting year for manga as an industry, as big steps were finally taken to make new manga releases available just as immediately to an English-speaking audience as new anime have been for some time. Shonen Jump is now available digitally the same day as it's sold in Japan, though unfortunately only about a third of Jump's full lineup is available, for an assortment of reasons that vary with each series. Crunchyroll recently began offering a similar service for Kodansha published series, which is hopefully an indication that other publishers will follow suit. However, the main focus of this video is on the new series that came out in Weekly Shonen Jump in 2013, including those that have already concluded.
And honestly, this was not a very good year for those new manga. A full dozen series came out in 2013, but only a few seem promising.
While normally I like to cover new manga by the order in which they debuted, I want to get 3 of them out of the way all at once. All 3 are weird gag manga, which always pose a problem when I try to review them because the humor they contain doesn't usually translate very well. First off is Koisuru Edison by Watanabe Kizuku, which is about a teenage girl who has a screw stuck in her head, and for whatever reason, the screw contains all of Thomas Edison's knowledge, so every chapter she sees some problem and cooks up a ridiculous invention to solve it in the craziest way possible. It's really not a novel concept, and I didn't find it charming or funny. There's this really creepy thing where the main character's face suddenly shifts to resemble Thomas Edison's when she's in invention mode, which I assume is meant to be humorous. The manga also loses cool points for going with the more famous choice of Edison instead of the more badass choice of Nikola Tesla. Then again, Edison seems like the more likely to invent a bunch of worthless shit, but I don't think that was the author's intent. Fans of Bakuman might recall that the main characters in that series came up with a similar premise for a manga and ended up seriously burning out on it, and after reading this thing, I can hardly blame them. Koi no Cupid Yakenohara Jin by Hasegawa Tomohiro is about a demon overlord who decides he's tired of his job and wants to become a love cupid instead. The main source of humor is that Yakenohara Jin is a giant imposing monster trying to help this poor dumb kid with his love life. Lastly, there's Isobe Isobe Monogatari Ukiyo wa Sorayo by Nakama Ryo, and man, this is a weird one. It's about this lazy samurai. The art is very reminiscent of works from the Edo period of Japanese history. The characters act like people from the modern day, and the contrast of their behavior with the aesthetic of the manga is the main source of humor for the series. While Koisuru Edison was cancelled after a few months, and Yakenohara Jin doesn't appear to be faring very well, Isobe Isobe has been consistently ranking at least moderately well in the Jump standings. It's possible that it will stick around in Jump for some time, but the humor is so ingrained in Japanese culture and history that it's not likely to ever make its way across the language barrier. So, in conclusion, I wouldn't recommend any of the 3 series to a general audience. Although I guess if you live and breathe Japanese culture and history, then Isobe might genuinely amuse you.
Now on the other side of things we have World Trigger, an adventure series that could very well end up becoming a mainstay in Jump for years to come.
If you're a regular listener of Weekly Manga Recap, and if you're not, you should be, then you already know how my feelings on World Trigger have changed over time. While initially I found it incredibly boring and was frustrated with the fact that it had been added to the English Shonen Jump lineup over some other, more deserving series, I've really warmed up to it in the nearly a year that it's been running. Somewhere around chapter 20 or so, all the characters were far more endearing and the plot far more interesting than I thought that they could have ever been when the series first started off. World Trigger is about Kuga Yuma, who is a neighbor, a being from a parallel world. Monstrous neighbors regularly invade the Earth and have to be repelled by an agency known as Border, but Yuma's basically just a friendly kid. He meets Mikumo Osamu, a novice member of Border, and the two strike up a friendship. Well, at first the two just kind of wander around not really doing anything, and Yuma was looking to be one of those underdeveloped, overpowered shonen protagonists that I hate so much. Eventually he, like the rest of the manga, got fleshed out and started to show great promise. There's a real sense of anticipation for what's going to happen further down the line in this manga, which is incredibly important for any shonen adventure series that hopes to have a long run. World Trigger also has a very enjoyable approach to combat, favoring positioning and tactics over sheer brute force, and I hope it maintains that focus rather than succumbing to a more standard battle manga feel as Naruto eventually did. It's a better fit for the series as a futuristic, technology-focused work, rather than the more fantastic settings that most of today's popular shonen battle manga have. And while most non-shonen fans may not feel that that distinction is really notable, it really does help to set World Trigger apart and give it a unique feel. If you've had a subscription to Shonen Jump but haven't been reading World Trigger, I recommend checking it out. You'll probably find it's more than worth your while.
really weird whenever a story that prominently features music is told through a non-audible medium, but I have to say that Soul Catchers has done a pretty decent job of pulling it off so far.
Kamine Shuta is a high school student with the supernatural ability to perceive people's emotional states by seeing their hearts. At the beginning of the manga, he's given up on actually using this ability to help people, having tried and failed multiple times in the past. However, everything changes when he meets a saxophonist named Tokisaka Hibiki, who has the ability to move people's hearts with the power of music. Using Kamine's perception and Tokisaka's musical talent, the two are able to help people experience emotional breakthroughs. However, rather than using their skills to help as many people around the world as possible, Tokisaka invites Kamine to become a conductor for their high school's orchestra, and use his supernatural ability to help them live up to their full potential. Irresponsible use of potentially great powers aside, Soul Catchers has so far been an interesting series to read. It's unusual that Kamine uses his powers for such a niche purpose, but it really plays to the manga's advantage. Kamine doesn't have any traditional musical education, so his understanding of any given piece of music comes exclusively from what his powers cause him to see while he's listening to it. As a result, for the reader, the fantastic images that Kamine's powers create stand in for actual music, and to great effect. It's also nice that the visuals of people's hearts are always abstract, so while Kamine's ability grants him greater insight into what people are going through than an ordinary person would have, he's not always spot on when trying to understand them. He's prone to misinterpreting what he sees. It's a pretty bizarre series overall, but it really does get all it can out of its premise, and it works. I can't say I'm really interested in continuing to read this series any further, but I don't really have anything negative to say about it. If you're a big fan of school life manga, then you'll probably enjoy Soul Catchers.
The premise of a master swordsman attempting to pursue a life of pacifism has been done in shonen manga in the past, and done to great effect. However, just because past authors have been able to do the idea doesn't mean everyone can pull it off.
Set in Edo period Japan, Mutou Black is the tale of Kurotsuki Yukiji, a martial artist who practices the swordless at heart style, meant to incapacitate the practitioner's opponent without bringing harm to either of them. So essentially he uses judo throws and such to take down swordsmen rather than harming them with his own weapons. Thing is, for as simple a concept as this is, the manga feels the need to restate it over and over again. Seriously, at the start of the first chapter, Kurotsuki explains the concept while essentially talking to himself, then later he teaches it to this kid, then he defeats some thugs while repeating all this crap, and then the kid restates everything at the end of the chapter when he decides to become Kurotsuki's disciple. Out of the 50 pages that make up the first chapter, I think 10 of them are spent explaining and re-explaining Kurotsuki's creed, and it's especially frustrating during the action scene because this should finally be the moment when the manga demonstrates the validity of everything Kurotsuki's been talking about and lets his actions back up his words, but instead he just keeps on talking. Mutou Black was cancelled after just 12 chapters, and it's really not that difficult to see why. When the main form of combat in your manga is comparatively mundane for a weekly Shonen Jump series, you have to do what you can to really spice it up, and Mutou Black only thought to talk it up.
For a sport that's been called America's pastime, Japan sure is a hell of a lot more enthusiastic about baseball than the United States is right now, to the point that not only have countless baseball manga been written, but countless types of baseball manga have been written.
So considering all of this, as bizarre as some parts of Smokey BB are, it never really caught me off guard. The manga is about this high school student named Haimura Enjiro, who is an immensely talented pitcher, but he's quit baseball because his family has fallen into crippling debt. As it so happens, a local high school has also fallen into debt, and somehow the only way to earn enough money to save the school is for their baseball team to win the annual national tournament, the Koshien. So the school's owner's daughter seeks out Enjiro and gets him to agree to help the team win the Koshien in exchange for paying off his family's debt with a portion of the winnings. The premise of a talented but coarse pitcher joining a team for the selfish purpose of obtaining money has been done before. But Smokey BB makes the bizarre choice of initially making Enjiro appear to be this type of character all throughout the first chapter, but then completely pivots and makes him appear considerably softer and more positive immediately thereafter. In Chapter 1 he's all, okay, so long as I get my money, I'll do whatever, and then in Chapter 2 he's protecting little kids from a bully. The parts of the series that are actually focused on baseball are pretty cool, and it seems like with a little bit of work this could have been a really good sports series, but overall it just feels like it doesn't have a clear identity, and that leads to inconsistent writing and weird developments that just come out of nowhere. Like, at first the team hates Enjiro because he's essentially a hired gun, so he comes up with a challenge to prove himself to the team, and in the middle of the challenge we're introduced to one of the members of the team who engages Enjiro in conversation. And by the end of the chapter in which he's introduced, he decides to help Enjiro win the challenge, and this is supposed to be a big dramatic moment, even though we've had absolutely no time to get to know the guy, and no reason to feel either surprised or satisfied that he's siding with Enjiro. And the manga is just full of those little moments that make you pause and go, wait, what? Like the one player on the team who's most opposed to Enjiro joining them has imaginary conversations with this snake who's tempting him to be a selfish prick, and by the end of the chapter that this aspect of his character is introduced, he's decided to ignore it. It just seems like everything was rushed out without being thought through, and it's no surprise that this manga was quickly and summarily cancelled.
Toriyama Akira. Even if you're not familiar with the name, you're almost certainly familiar with the legacy. So after the creator of Dragon Ball has made your company countless millions, if he comes to you and says that he wants to make a short little series about a stupid alien, then you should probably just let him have his fun.
Toriyama specifically wrote Yako to last just 11 chapters, but despite its short run, the manga was a very fun read. While it ties into the story of Dragon Ball in the end, it's focused entirely on a new group of characters who managed to leave a very good impression in a short period of time. The idea is that this alien police officer of sorts named Yako has been sent to Earth on a mission, but he crash lands and ends up stranded on an island, whose sole inhabitant is an old man named Omori. With little other choice, the two start to get to know one another and try to figure out how to acquire the materials they need to repair Yako's ship. Yako is a bit of a bizarre reading experience in comparison with the more in-your-face type manga that Shonen Jump usually runs. What few action scenes there are to be found are over with quickly, and the humor isn't exactly outrageous, and to be blunt, there are a few standout moments of any kind in the whole thing. That's not to say Yako isn't good, however. It's very good. The best way I can describe it is, reading it made me feel happy. It's a very pleasant series to read, and it's nice to have something like that every now and again. If you want something that will put you in a good mood without really challenging you or taking up too much of your time, read this. And definitely read this if you're a huge Dragon Ball fan who likes to experience every single facet of the series. Toriyama stated at the beginning of Yako that this would be the final manga that he would create on his own, and it's an excellent series to close the curtain on his body of work.
If otherworldly creatures really did exist, how would they get by on modern-day Earth? A lot of works of science fiction are based around that question, and with good reason. There's a lot of fun you can have with the idea.
Kurokuroku takes the idea and applies it to the yokai of Japanese folklore, who live in secret amongst humans with the assistance of a secret branch of the Tokyo City Hall. The main characters are Yusa Chiaki, a frugal, no-nonsense girl who begins working at the City Hall at the start of the series, and Ando Kuroku, who generally lazes around unless trouble rears its head, in which case he turns some random office supply into a giant weapon and bashes it in the face. So it's kind of like Men in Black, but with creatures like Kappas instead of aliens, and for whatever reason it just doesn't work. The characters are so generic. Just a too cool to ever show a strong emotion male lead and a no-nonsense tsundere, and what parts of their characters are interesting, like Kuroku's weird powers and Chiaki's determination to earn money in order to provide for her sister, are underemphasized in favor of doing all of the typical, maybe the seemingly incompetent dude isn't so bad after all, stories in practically every single chapter. Yeah, I get it, Kuroku's socially oblivious but dependable where it matters most. What else have you got for me? Kuroku tanked pretty hard after debuting, and never made it higher than the bottom 2 in Weekly Shonen Jump's popularity rankings for the entirety of its run. I get the feeling we aren't missing out on much due to its quick cancellation.
So, while Kuroku was stewing in the bottom 2 of the Jump rankings for the entirety of its run, this series was sticking right alongside it the whole time.
Hime Doll is about an aspiring hairdresser named Kiriyama Kyotaro, who goes to a bizarre, specialized high school level academy where he meets an infamous female delinquent and gang leader named Samejima Alto. Samejima is attending the same academy because she secretly wishes to become a celebrity idol, and after discovering her secret, Kiriyama agrees to help disguise Samejima and improve her looks so that she can pursue her dream. Over time, a love triangle also develops between Kiriyama, Samejima, and a second aspiring idol. I don't actually have anything bad to say about Hime Doll, but the whole thing is just kind of okay. The humor's alright, the art's alright, the delivery of the message that you should never be afraid to follow your dreams is alright. Everything's at least passable. The problem is that I generally don't have any interest in this type of series, and I imagine that because everything's just okay, then it's probably been done better before, and it probably needed to be better in order to survive in Shonen Jump. For a manga run in a magazine that's aimed at teenage boys, you'd think that Hime Doll would be a bit more focused on either Samejima's occasionally violent behavior, or cramming in a few more instances of fan service. But it seems far more concerned with playing up Samejima's dual identity, which honestly seems like the least interesting part of the manga, especially considering she's only concerned with keeping her secret from her family, yet she keeps it from the entire school as well. I imagine that the series was played this way in the hopes that it would have crossover appeal. Shonen Jump really benefits from having a strong female fan base, so it makes sense to aim for that demographic, but Hime Doll apparently didn't pull it off. I can't say it really deserved better than it got, but at the same time, I don't think it was on par with the other early cancellations this year.
Kurokuroku and Hime Doll were the last two series to be cancelled in Jump in 2013. However, that's no guarantee that the remaining series are any good. It just means that they debuted so recently that the decision has been made to cancel them yet.
Inogawa Hachi is a hyperactive teenager who has an incredibly potent sense of smell, and desires to one day, somehow, become a hero. Although, as his friend Takin points out, he has no idea how to actually do so. It turns out that Hachi's sense of smell comes from the fact that he is a half, a mutant who is somehow descended from the gods. More specifically, Hachi is a relative of the guardian of the underworld, Cerberus, and like other halves, by drinking human blood he can unlock his true form. So at first it seems like this is going to be sort of a mystery series with a supernatural twist, along the lines of Majin Tate no Gamineri, and maybe Hachi and Takin will go around solving mysteries and tracking down other halves, and Hachi can do battle with them. But then in Chapter 3, Hachi comes across a group of halves that completely overpower him, and he's knocked into a 6-month-long coma, and when he awakens, the halves have completely taken over Tokyo and regularly farm blood from their human slaves. Well, that escalated quickly. So instead, Hachi is part of this resistance group and is trying to defeat the halves and rescue Takin, and we go straight from the horrifying visual of enslaved humans to getting introduced to Hachi's fellow freedom fighters, who all have goofy character traits and oh god, now my neck is sore from the mood whiplash. There's something just very disjointed with the way the premise gets set up, and it occupies the very awkward zone where things aren't happening quickly enough, but not happening gradually enough either. Like if the whole point was that demons take over the city and Hachi has to take it back, and that was what you wanted to do the whole time, that's fine, but it takes a whole 5 chapters just to get things started. Or hell, if it had taken longer for the halves to take over Tokyo, and we spent more time establishing Hachi and his powers and his friendship with Takin, that could have worked too, and then would have felt like a bigger deal when the situation escalated. Plus, that would have had the advantage of Hachi being in more than 2 goddamn fights before necessitating a different combat form. Hachi looks to be close to cancellation, and I can't say I'm really surprised. It's poorly paced, it's not really interesting to look at, it's surprisingly tone-deaf. Overall, I can't think of a really good reason to bother checking it out.
And that finally brings us to Iron Knight, a series that in many ways is strikingly similar to Hachi, and yet is also very different in how it's been executed.
Both manga have young protagonists that turn out to be capable of transforming into a monstrous, superhuman form because they're part of a race of creatures that bring about an apocalypse, during which the protagonist becomes separated from their childhood friend/love interest. The thing about Iron Knight is that it manages to lay all of this out in the span of the first chapter, really drawing you into the protagonist's plight from the get-go. Our hero is a 10-year-old kid named Ushizume Teppei, who wants to follow in his police detective father's footsteps and become a dependable hero. Some sort of incident occurs which awakens the dormant demonic powers of a large portion of the population. Chaos is unleashed and many humans are killed, with many of the empowered humans either going insane or reveling in the death they bring about. When Teppei's powers awaken, granting him the ability to summon fire and cover his body in metal, he decides to fight against the other demons in order to protect what remains of humanity, and hopefully be reunited with his father and friends. Iron Knight is remarkably engaging, absolutely nailing a fine balance between dealing with some really heavy material while maintaining the bright outlook that defines most Jump series. Teppei is an excellent protagonist, and it's really interesting to watch him deal with the loss of his innocence and naivete while holding on to his optimism and moral code. It's a bit difficult to get behind the design of his demonic form, since he's almost pitch black and some of his features aren't very distinct, But that said, his powers are really cool, especially when he realizes that he can craft tools and weapons out of his metal skin. I have some high hopes for Iron Knight, but it's still a very young series and it's at the point where it's impossible to determine how well it's being received over in Japan. Hopefully it clicks with other readers the way it has with me. I'm really looking forward to seeing where this series goes.
So, there you have it. A dozen different series and only about 2 or 3 that I feel confident in recommending. As always, though, I look forward to what the next year has to offer the manga industry, and here's hoping this presence on digital platforms only continues to grow. I'm our ruler of time, and for the rest of 2014 and beyond, I ask that you forget what they taught you in school, and always read right to left.